geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gats and kittens, comic fans the world over. And welcome, willkommen, V Gates, to another thrill-packed, information-loaded episode of Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, a major, big-time comic book insider, about what I do for a living, and what I do for a living is I write comic books. Let's not waste a single second of your precious time. Ivan Magila, he wants to know, who earns royalties? I mean, I know the writer and the artist, but is that it? Or the colorist, inkers, letterers also get paid? Well, there's all kinds of different deals, I guess, with royalties, and it depends on what company you're at. But largely at DC, I think it was the writers, pencilers, and inkers. And when I worked there, the writers got a bigger share of royalties because the game was being run by editors, and editors were writers, not artists. But also, they realized that the artists make additional money from selling their original artwork. And so they compensated by giving writers a larger share. And I think it's only at DC, I can really only speak for DC. I think inkers get royalties. I'm not sure the colorists do. Certainly letterers don't. But they may have made special deals because it's DC Comics. There's always deals, more on that later. But maybe there was a colorist back in the day when colorists were the stars of the show. Not that they're not now, not that they're not important, but there was this period where colorists, like post cross-gen, colorists were a hot commodity, and they were superstars in their own right. And maybe to woo a colorist to one company or another, they might have offered them royalties or some sort of a bonus program. I don't know. But at Marvel, once again, it was incentives. I think you have more to ask about that, because you, Ivan, get a twin spin. Okay, Ivan is back with, what is the proportion of royalties? I know that the page rate for an artist is fairly higher than the writers. I imagine the page rate for inkers and colorists is also lower than the artists. What about the royalties? Are they the same for everyone? Who gets to earn it? Or are there some different levels too? Well, there's always different levels. And like I said, there's always deals within deals. Artists, pencilers generally make the most, followed by inkers. Now, as I mentioned, there was a period like post cross-gen when coloring suddenly, it's like the companies woke up to the fact that coloring is really important, and maybe coloring is something special, not just something done at the last minute by editors applying color codes to Charaxes. Maybe coloring itself was an art form. Can you imagine that? And so colorists were making more than writers. Pencilers generally make twice to 3 times more than the writer does. The inker generally makes maybe a little less than half of what the penciler makes, and colorists, the market is sort of adjusted, and colorists are now making about what writers do. But for a while there, colorists were making big money. And by big money, I mean, you have colorists that could do 3 books a month. So they were doing okay. But now I think the field is more crowded. There was a time, lettering is cheaper now. Letterers get a lower rate now because a letterer can do 10, 12, 15 books a month because of computerized lettering. But like I said, there's always deals. Now, a little off on a tangent, inside baseball knowledge. I probably told this story before. But at the height of Nightfall, when we were often gathered in the DC offices, because there was a lot of face-to-face time going on at Nightfall, where we would have meetings. And on one of those occasions, Graham Nolan and I happened to be hanging around in the bat offices, and Graham happened to see a pay voucher for another penciler. And when he saw the page rate, Graham just sort of, you know, got 3 feet taller and 6 feet wider and got pretty angry because he was told he was making the maximum page rate. But the page rate on this voucher for this other penciler was higher. And when he asked about it, it was explained to him, well, that was a special rate. So he said, so there's a maximum rate and there's a special rate? And they said, yes. And quite frankly, this penciler getting the special rate was not on a best-selling book, as Graham was at the time, and for my money was not anywhere near as talented as Graham. And but Graham fixed that, because, as I call him, never back down Nolan. He was right up to the 7th floor. I mean, he walked out without even saying goodbye. He was off to the 7th floor, and he came back about 30 minutes later, and he had his own very special rate. Oh, DC, man, the House of Secrets. Uh, triple spin. Triple spin means that Ivam is back. He's up to the plate again. And he says, you already said that Marvel does not pay any royalties, but an incentive. You also said that Image was built by Marvel royalties because those guys were making a buttload of money. So was this just a way of speaking, or at some point Marvel changed the rules from royalties to incentive, possibly because of that? No, it was always incentives at Marvel. It was never royalties. And as I've said before, royalties were an incentive. The rate could be adjusted up and down, whereas at DC, the rate was the rate. The royalty rate is your royalty rate. It's carved in stone. It's contractually obligated. And Marvel, no, you sign everything away at Marvel. Every right you have. Every time you endorse a check from Marvel or agree to accept a payment from Marvel, you are tacitly agreeing, I don't have any right to this work that I've just created for you. And so Marvel, it's always been an incentive, both any kind of royalties or bonuses and return of original art. Marvel does not contractually have to return original art to you. They do it as a favor, as a gift, and they have withheld original art from people in the past, saying we don't have to give it to you. And I assume they have held back royalties as well. And I'm calling them, they've held back incentives. And I'm absolutely certain that some people get more of an incentive than others. I mean, I get the minimum incentive. I have to. I've gotten checks for 17 cents, 26 cents. That these checks, if I got them from DC for the same amount of sales, would have been in the hundreds of dollars, not in the, cents. There would have been no cents at all. And I've gotten checks from Marvel, like $1,000. That same check from DC would have been about $8,000. Commensurate with how the property in question sold. Now, I never really thought about this. You're brilliant, Ivan. But when the royalty rates were cut, steeply cut, incentive rates, keep saying royalties, the incentive rates at Marvel were cut. It probably was because folks at a higher pay grade than the staff at Marvel Comics probably said, look what you did. You just funded your competition. You paid these dopes millions of dollars in incentive money that if you had withheld it, they'd still be working here. Tom McFarlane would still be drawing Spider-Man for us. But no, he goes off and forms his own company with a bunch of his friends. And he uses our money to do it. That had to have been a discussion at one point or another, or several points. I'm sure that was the subject brought up at many, many meetings with Marvel. And so in this period, post Tom DeFalco, the incentive rates are cut drastically. I mean, just to give you an example, I was on Savage Sword of Conan, which was it sold about 30,000 copies in comic shops, which in that day were terrible sales. DC and Marvel, they'd probably be dancing in the hallways if they had a title that sold regularly 30,000 copies. But Savage Sword of Conan was seen as like a loss leader as far as the comic book shops were concerned, because it only sold about 30,000, which was considered poor sales. But on the newsstand, it was 175,000 to sometimes $250,000. And so that book paid, between $2,500 and $3,500 a month in incentives. And this is under Jim Shooter. And Jim Shooter was very generous with incentives, and Tom DeFalco continued the tradition, which is how the Image guys got financed. So I guess from a business standpoint, from a purely cold, calculating, capitalist stance, you don't want to be funding your artists to create a competing company. So, and you're probably right. You're probably absolutely right. They lowered the incentive rates for that very reason. Something I've never really thought about, and I've never heard anybody else say. Good for you. Quad spin. Yvonne wanted a quad spin. He told me this in the email because he wanted to see this Judge Dredd graphic. So I'm just talking so it can run a little while because Yvonne earned it. So no surprise, Yvonne is back with Archie Goodwin. Any funny stories with him, especially in the 80s when you were newly met? Nothing. I mean, he was a fun guy and a funny guy to be around, but nothing. I never saw him do anything outrageous, but I've heard stories. I've said before, probably the funniest thing, darkly funny, bleakly funny thing I ever heard him say was one of the times I went up, he took me and a friend of mine to lunch at the top of the Sixes, and the maitre d' asked us smoking or non-smoking, and Archie said, well, it doesn't matter to me, I'm dying of cancer, which, he had cancer at the time. He wasn't Archie had, boy, this joke isn't funny at all. Archie went into remission 2 times, so we had, many more years with Archie following that incident at top of the Sixes. Certainly not enough years with Archie, but a funny story. I'll tell you a funny story to in the wake of that pathos is there was a tour going through, and this was told to me by, oh man, I can't remember her name. Her name was Martha. I can't remember her last name, but she was giving a tour of the DC offices to, God knows who. And she's going down, editor's row, and she's, people, doors are open, and she's saying, this is so-and-so, and this is so-and-so, and this is so-and-so. And she stands in the doorway with her little tour group, and in Archie's office doorway, and Archie is talking to Walt Simonson. So Archie's sitting across the desk from Walt Simonson and are talking. And Martha says, and this is Archie Goodwin and Walt Simonson, the nicest man in comics. And then Archie, he leaps up and he leans on the desk and he begins screaming, I'm the nicest man in comics. I am the nicest man in comics. Which he was. He really was. Walt's a sweetheart, but Archie was the nicest man in comics. Okay, a quintuple spin. You move on to the big time, Yvonne, with this question. Don Daley, he seems to be too funny and kind of crazy. So now you want a Don Daley story. This is my favorite Don. There were many, many Don Daley stories. Um, he's kind of legendary. A lot of funny stories about him with women. I won't go into any of them. But this was we were sitting around his office, hanging around. He was the Punisher editor at the time, so I had a lot of reason to deal with him and his associate editor, Tim Toohey. Tim Toohey was a blast to work with. Tim Toohey's energy level was infectious. What a great guy. Um, but the two of them together were, I mean, you know, it was a wild office. And so briefly, Don Daley was editor of Savage Sword of Conan. So I'm dealing with him with two properties, Punisher and Conan, simultaneously. And so Don brings up the name, this artist's name. I've seen samples from this guy. I think he'd be really good. I think he'd be good for Conan. He's never done Conan before. And some of the samples were pictures of Conan. We should hire him. And Tim Toohey says, well, you can't hire him. And he goes, well, Don's like, why can't we hire him? And Tim says, because he's in prison, because he killed his wife with a hammer. And he beat her to death with a claw hammer. And Don just sort of leans back on his desk and says, damn, he would have been the perfect Conan artist. And Don didn't say it as a joke. So that is Don. I'm sure that is Don to this day. So what an awesome guy to work with. Okay, David Jordan is up to bat here. I don't know why I'm doing any baseball analogies, but I am. David Jordan says, can you give us your top 5 non-English, untranslated comics or manga you most want translated? Personally, I'd love to see Diabolic stuff translated. I've been trying to use an AI program and do it myself, but there are so many of those comics, and you have to do it a page at a time. Yeah, it kind of loses the feeling, but the Diabolic would be cool. I watched a bunch of Diabolic movies recently, and the character's really neat, and I would like to read some, but tragically, they are not available, and there's so many. That's the problem. It's like you look at these things, it's like, my God, in some cases there's 50 years of these comics, and I can't read them. I can look at them, all the pretty pages. Now, I've mentioned this manga before. It's never been translated into English. It's a shame because it's been translated into a lot of European languages, but never English. And I'm going to murder the name of this series. It's Surakichi Senpai, and it's about fishing, deep sea fishing, brook fishing, trout fishing. I picked up copies of this at the Kinokuniya bookstore in New York, like back in the late 70s. And I picked up a couple of the big weekly comics, and in there were, this comic about fishing, and I just love the artwork. Just crazy. It's like a more fully rendered Osamu Tezuka. It has that kind of energy to it, and just a fabulously drawn comic with like really cool characters and things like that. And I have like a big collection of the manga, some in Japanese, some in Italian. But it's never been in English, largely because it's about fishing. It's not giant robots or space battles, things like that. So they go, oh, well, American audiences won't care about this. But I really wish there was an English translation of this. I think there's an anime as well, because it's apparently it was extraordinarily popular in Japan because it ran for years and years and years and years. But that's probably number 1 on my list. Now, next one is Tex Willer from Benelli Comics, been around for 80 years. Thousands upon thousands of comics. I have like, I guess if you measure it out, it's like 12 feet of shelf space in my library are text volumes of various sizes. And Epicenter is, I'm kind of cheating here because Epicenter is translating some of text into these really, really beautiful volumes, including the one that I wrote. Very honored about that. So they continue to present it, but they'll never catch up. They'll never catch up because there's been so many absolutely gorgeous works of text by all the top artists in the world. I mean, Alfonso Font, Michel Rabini did a huge story recently. Um, Jordi Bernet, Jose Ortiz. I mean, the names, the list goes on and on. It's like every top cartooning talent in South America and Europe have contributed to text, and it's all wonderful. I just love to read them all. I'd retire and just spend all my days just reading text because I love this stuff. Another one that there's been a few English translations of that I'd love to read more of because there's so much of it is Golgo 13. Duke Togo is a hired killer, and the stories are just terrific. They're just terrific, multi-layered, well-researched espionage and crime stories as Duke travels all around the world to knock off people for money. And, you know, like I said, there's been a few, maybe a dozen volumes translated into English, but there's hundreds. There's hundreds of these books. And by books, I mean these things are almost 200 pages long. So I'd love to see more of that. And yeah, I know I'm geeking out here, aren't I? There's a series from France called Sauvage. That's savage to you Anglos, and it's about the French involvement in Mexico in the 1860s, 1870s. The Battle of Cameroon. Emperor Maximilian is ruling Mexico because the Mexican government failed to repay a debt owed to the French government. And so the French government repossessed the country, or they attempt to repossess the country. And they send the French army, the French Foreign Legion, and the rest of it. And it's a really good series. It's like 5 albums. I don't think they did any more than that. I keep checking to see if they do more. But I love the art. It's written by a very prolific writer over there named Jan, who works on just about every French Belgian character you can possibly imagine. But really great series, really well researched with terrific characters and fantastic action. And I just love to know exactly what's going on some of those pages. But I love looking at it, and I pull these down every once in a while just to leaf through them because I love the period, and I love the art. Spirou. Now again, Spirou Cinebooks has translated maybe 17, 20 volumes of Spirou. Spirou is a very long-running character. Started in the 30s. He's a bellhop at a Parisian hotel who, for some reason, gets involved in international adventures, even space. He's been on the moon. Spirou is just one of those crazy, crazy characters. And he has his own magazine in France, and hugely popular. But a few years ago, I found volumes drawn by an artist named Olivier Schwartz, and I'm like devoted to this guy now. All Spirou art is fantastic. The tremendous artists have worked on this title, but Olivier Schwartz, to me, it's just groundbreaking stuff. Absolutely beautiful, and I've collected everything he's done. It's not terribly prolific, but I've collected everything he's done. And they've done a recent set of volumes that I have all of, but can't read, of Spirou, sort of an Elseworlds kind of version of Spirou set in the Second World War. And of course, Spirou was around in the Second World War as a character, but these kind of represent the character. And the thing I like about French comics is when they reboot or do a reimagining, they don't really change anything. They don't change the core of the character. The character remains the same. They just put them into a different setting, into a great story. So now another one, I know I listed 5 already, but another one I came across recently is called The Kong Crew. And there's 3 volumes in French, absolutely beautiful, oversized albums. And the premise of this is it's set in New York City post King Kong. It's set in the 40s, and it posits a world in which dinosaurs coexist with man. And the art, I've just gotten the 3 volumes recently, and I really haven't dug into them, but the art is so impressive, and the storytelling is amazing. Just from the, leafing through what I've done. So I'll probably report back to you more on that when I've actually had a chance to look at these. And why aren't they in English? Just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Now, as a complete aside, for those of you interested in reading European comics, in particular in English, Paper Cuts has released new editions of Asterix that they're calling collectors volumes, and they're bigger. They're like 25% larger, and they include a lot of back matter, photographs of the creators, sketches, model sheets. They're really worth getting. If you're an Asterix fan, even if you already own these books, they're worth getting. They're worth getting. I donated all my Asterix books and replaced them with these, and also gives me an excuse to reread them. But these are like remastered versions, and absolutely worth getting if you're into Asterix at all. And if you're not, why aren't you? It's one of the greatest comics ever created. Okay, Rebecca Charlin. She's gonna make me think. I gotta put my philosopher's hat on for Rebecca here, because she says reform villains seem to be a rather divisive topic amongst comic book fans, particularly discussions about which villains can or cannot, should or should not be redeemed. I am curious what your thoughts on this topic. How should it be handled or be done well? Are there some classes of villain that should never be reformed? What qualities make for a villain who can or should be turned around? When should it be a permanent change, and when should it be temporary or fake out? Do you have a favorite or least favorite example of a redeemed or self-reformed villain? I like my villains neat. I like my villains to stay bad. I want them to be bad for good. um, they can be sympathetic, but I want them to be bad. I was really happy recently. I read the X-Men Elsewhere by John Byrne, and in it, it had a lot of amazing things in it. But in it, he does a service to all of us because, in recent years, they tried to redeem Magneto and make him sympathetic, give him a motive behind what he does and everything else. And John Byrne just turns the clock back on all that. He's just a bastard. He's just an evil guy. And I really like it. I really like just an egomaniac, narcissistic a-hole. And I like that. Like I said, I like my villains neat. Now, you can have sympathy. There's a scene in Manhunter, which was based on Thomas Harris's Red Dragon, in which the Tooth Fairy, who's the serial killer in that, it's a Hannibal Lecter thing. The Tooth Fairy is the bad guy, and the detective investigating it is asked, you know the history of this guy, what his life was. It's a very tragic life leading up to, him being this, demented lunatic who goes around murdering whole families. So his background. How do you feel about that? And the detective says, my heart bleeds for him as a child. As an adult, someone should blow the sick bleep out of his socks. And to me, that's where we should be with villains. Now, you talk about least favorite villain that they reformed. Negan from Walking Dead is possibly the most evil character ever presented in a TV series, and they kept him around. I mean, they could have killed him, executed him at any moment for the god awful things he did. This is an irredeemable character. But once again, they were like, oh, well, he lost his wife and he did this and that. I'm sorry, but that's not an excuse for becoming the sadistic bastard he turned into. And well, how could you ever trust him? And yet they redeemed. They gave him his own series where he's hanging out with a woman whose husband he beat to death with a baseball bat. I mean, I'm sorry, that doesn't work. It doesn't work on a fictional basis. It doesn't work in a real life basis because the older you get, you realize people don't change that much. They really don't change that much. And if they do change, it was with a lot of help from Jesus. And Negan wasn't asking for help from anybody. So, people don't change their nature to that degree where you could turn your back on them again once you've seen the horrible things they did. So, like so many things in the later seasons of The Walking Dead, didn't make any sense whatsoever. Now, long-time listeners of this channel probably already predicted where I'm going here, but I'll say it once again. Perfect example, Raymond Burr, the bad guy in Rear Window. He's suspected of murder. He is a murderer. But when we finally meet him, because we get to see him from a distance, because that's the gimmick in the movie, Jimmy Stewart looking out the rear window of his apartment, spying on his neighbors. Suspects Raymond Burr has murdered his wife. When push comes to shove, when the climax of the movie comes, Raymond Burr comes to Jimmy Stewart, who is helpless in a wheelchair, to confront him and obviously to kill him. But Burr stands in the darkness. As if you're watching this, you can see the scene here, and he says, basically, why are you doing this to me? Why? So Burr sees himself now as the victim, and for just that fraction of a second, we have sympathy for him, and we understand him, which makes it all the more real, because he's not just an evil guy. He's a guy who felt pushed to do. He is evil, but he's not just evil. He was pushed to do what he did. In his mind, his only way out of whatever situation he was in, we never learn. That's not important. His only way out was to kill his wife. And he thought he got away with it. And now he confronts the guy who's going to take his potentially happy life away from him. And he plays the victim. And it's a terrific moment. But it doesn't redeem him. It doesn't redeem him. It just makes us care more for a moment about him as a character, and which makes him more real to us. Twin spin. Rebecca is back to task me once again. On the other side of the coin, what are your thoughts on heroes who go through little villainous phases who are permanently made into baddies? I personally have found it overused and even possibly insulting to fans of the characters, particularly if the character is popular with children. I don't want to bother you too much with my own thoughts, but it more often than not feels a touch forced or out of left field to myself, a shocking twist for the sake of a shocking twist. Are there examples of established heroes turned bad that were handled well? What can or should be done to make a heroic fall from grace be compelling without alienating the audience? At the core of Nightfall, our whole point was, and thank you for an awesome question. Thank you, for challenging me here. But at the core of Nightfall was this question. What if Batman turned evil? What if Batman turned into a bad guy? But we weren't going to let Bruce Wayne Batman do that. I mean, that's silly. And nobody would have liked that. Nobody would have been happy with that. And it would be a horrible thing to do to the character. So we had another guy be Batman and showed you what an evil Batman would be like. And that was really the whole point of Nightfall was that story. And basically show you don't want a homicidal Batman. You don't want a Batman driven by revenge to the point where he throws away, he violates the social contract and throws away the Ten Commandments and just does whatever he feels is right at the time. You didn't want a means justifies the ends Batman, and we prove that until apparently recently. People have forgotten that lesson. But you have characters who are heroes, who can turn not into basically villains, but can do bad things, be driven. Lawrence of Arabia is one of the best examples I can think of. Lawrence starts out as like he's a romantic. He thinks he's on this adventure, and he's not really taking it seriously. He's going to war in an exotic place with some colorful people in a different culture, and he's sort of subsumed, sort of absorbed into this, and he takes it on as like this grand lark that he's on until he gets captured by the Turks and is tortured and abused and everything else, and he comes out the other side a very, very different person. If you've seen the movie, and if you haven't seen the movie, you've got to see this movie. It culminates in the famous no prisoners scene. He's a very different person, and he becomes, he was a threat to the Turks in the first half of the movie. Now he's a menace to the Turks, and because this is no longer romantic adventure. He's seen the darkest side of war now, and he's experienced it himself, and now it's rage, it's hate that drives him, and it's a great example of a hero not turned villain, but a hero kind of brought down to earth, and becomes a ends justify the means kind of character. Orion is, for me, the greatest character in comics who is a hero revealed to have villainous properties. Orion, if you've never followed Kirby's New Gods, is Darkseid's son. But in a hostage situation, he is exchanged for Scott Free, and Scott Free, who becomes Mr. Miracle, is sent to live on Apocalypse, and Orion is sent to be raised on New Genesis. And the lesson really doesn't take. The New Genesis lesson from the All Father doesn't really take, or the High Father, I can't remember, I haven't read them in a while. And Orion is still a son of a bitch. He's just an exterminating bastard. And what I like is he's kind of enigmatic at the beginning of Kirby's epic. And we know he's a badass, but we don't know much about his personality. He's kind of a stoic. And over time, it's revealed that he's every bit Darkseid's son, to the point where even his facial features begin to morph as this rage and cynicism and absolute delight in harming other people takes over. So it's the best example. But the thing is, Orion was not an iconic character. We didn't know anything about Orion. He wasn't an iconic character brought down, after we learned to love him and everything else. Kirby created him to be this conflicted character, there's this dichotomy within him. He's fighting for the good side, but he's also indulging in some really, really nasty behavior because of his lineage. And yeah, you don't want to do that to Superman. That's just not right. It's not right, because it's like back in the day, you'd have a situation comedy, and you would come to care for the characters. You would watch a season of this show or that show, and you become the character. You were watching the show for laughs and everything else, but you begin to be engaged with the characters, and then very cynically they would do quote unquote very special episodes in which one of the characters dies or gets ill or whatever, and all of a sudden it's not funny anymore, but they had you hooked because now you cared about the characters. So now, no, we don't have to be funny anymore. We're going to drag you in and basically, make a soap opera out of this show. This famously, at least when I was a kid, happened with Ozzie and Harriet. Ozzie and Harriet show started out funny. It was a funny show and just became a soap opera over time as the different characters had babies and got married and things like that. And every episode was a very special episode, and the show wasn't funny anymore. Uh, so when you take somebody like Superman or Spider-Man, you turn them into a villain for a while. First of all, the readers know it's a cheap gimmick because you're going to have to go back. And secondly, it's a violation of the trust between the readership and the creators to do something like that, and it shouldn't be done. So I think we're in agreement, Rebecca, 100% on this. Oh, Etc. Studios. As a comic fan, I collected just about every issue of the various Valiant comic series of the 90s. Did you ever read and enjoy any of these series from these Valiant guys? Were you ever offered work from Valiant in the 90s to write for one of their series? The only one I remember, and I really did enjoy it a lot, was Magnus Robot Fighter. Um, Jim Shooter on art and various people on or Jim Shooter on writing, various people on art. Was it Bob Layton? Did Bob Layton work? I know Ernie Colon did a couple of really cool issues of Magnus Robot Fighter. I liked them so much I bought some original art from Ernie from those issues. And he did I'm off on a tangent, but it's my show. Get your money back at the door. He did the work with color pencils on gray paper, like this textured, really unusual textured gray paper. It's really, really cool. But yeah, I remember Magnus Robot Fighter, and to tell you the truth, I can't remember any of the other early Valiant titles. I know they eventually brought back Solar, Man of the Atom, and Turok, but I don't remember. And I kind of stopped. I was buying them and then realized I had this huge stack, and I hadn't read any of them, so I just kind of got rid of them. And unfortunately, that was true for a lot of people because Valiant, from talking to retailers, Valiant was one of the big culprits in the 90s implosion because they were cranking out so much material and variant covers and things like that. And dealers ended up with, huge inventory of Valiant issues that they couldn't move because the audience for them was gone. And I remember one retailer telling me that he basically filled a dumpster with Valiant comics from his 3 stores because, you get taxed on inventory. And he couldn't afford to carry these books anymore because, they were killing him because of the implosion. And he had to close 2 stores and he had to make the very, very sad and regretful action of throwing away comic books. But he did it. Now that's nothing on the quality of the books or anything else. I just kind of lost interest. And maybe that is something to say about the quality of the books. But I know they had loyal fans. I know Mark Alessi was a big fan of the Valiant stuff. When I worked at CrossGen, he had a lot of original art from different Valiant runs, and he looked at them a lot for the quality because they really were top quality books. Valiant books at the time looked better than any other comics on the market, and they certainly had great artists and writers. But was I ever offered? No, I was so under Jim Shooter's radar, and then whoever took over after that were people that had no use for me. I was not on. Well, I was on their lists, but not on any lists to be hired. So yeah, I've never heard from anybody in that company. Never been offered a book. to answer your question. Kieran Brancard, when you revise, roughly how many passes or drafts do you typically go through before something feels finished? In comics, I don't do any rewriting. As Scott Peterson once asked me after I handed in a Detective Comics script, he goes, "You don't even reread these before you send them in because of the typos." And I was famous for miscounting pages. I still am, still famous for miscounting pages or having 2-page 17s or no page 20 in my scripts. Just simply lose count because I'm innumerate. So yeah, I never do that. But prose is a whole different thing. I really like rewriting. I hate rewriting comics because you have to reformat. You have to move panels around. So you're doing, not only are you rewriting art descriptions and dialogue, but you're also reformatting. You're shifting the whole thing about. So, but rewriting prose is fun. I'm almost like got to be dragged away from the rewriting. It's like, oh, give me one more pass. I'll take one more pass. Because as I quickly learned in prose writing, you just get it down. When you're first writing prose, you just get it down, get your story down. Don't worry about spelling. Don't worry about names. Don't worry about this. Don't worry about that. Come back later. You can always come back to it because you don't write, you rewrite. And that's terrific. It's hard. It's hard sometimes because you're writing. It's like, what was the name of that place in France? And it's like, skip it. Just put it blank. Just put a blank there, and you'll figure it out later. It's hard to walk past that, but I've learned to do it mostly. And then you go back and rewrite. And I found I really love rewriting. I mean, I like writing, but I really love rewriting because all the really hard work has been done. The tracks have been laid, the grading has been made. Now it's just details and filling in and looking at it with new eyes and going, oh, there's a better way to say this, or I can polish this up, or hey, that was pretty good, but this might make it a little better. And it's like detailing the car rather than building it, because building a car would be very difficult, but cleaning it's not so bad. So there you go. Gentle Savage, I have some questions regarding your Charaxes version of Killer Moth. Do you have any further plans for that version of the character? Did you have any further plans for that version of the character after the initial story you told with that version? How do you feel about the way that Killer Moth's character is portrayed in general? Do you like the fact that his character is usually portrayed as a joke gag villain, or do you think the character should outgrow that portrayal? Now, Charaxes was created for, was it Underworld, Underground? I can't remember. They brought in some sort of like Neuron, this like Satan type character, and he was morphing a lot of the Batman villains into, like more demonic or animalistic images. And the Bat guys thought, we could do this Killer Moth. And they turned him into Charaxes, which is a name I came up with because Charaxes was Latin for moth. Yeah, it did take a genius to come up with that one. And the most fun thing about it is they assigned Flint Henry the job, my buddy Flint Henry, the job of redesigning Killer Moth as Charaxes, and he did some fantastic model sheets. If you're watching, this is one of the images he came up with, and if you have a really big screen, you can read that he signed the work Brundle Flint as a nod to the movie The Fly. So um, I think I only used this character a few times, and because it was like editorially driven. But as far as the traditional portrayal of Killer Moth, I kind of liked him as a loser, not a joke character, but kind of a loser because he saw himself as the underworld's version of Batman. He was going to be the Batman for the crooks. And he imitates Batman in that he has a lair and he's got his own like special Moth mobile and all the rest of it. And I just love playing with the idea of this guy who really doesn't have the chops. And he's no Bruce Wayne. He doesn't, he's got no chance of accomplishing his goal of being, this super cool um, accessory to the world of crime, and he just keeps screwing up. Just he's got bad luck, everything else, and I really like that portrayal. I mean, with that costume and Killer Moth, I mean, it's a silly name, Killer Moth. I mean, what Killer Mouse, you know, Murder Gerbil. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Um, what are you going to do with a character like that except lean into the goofiness? Although I never really portrayed him as goofy. I always portrayed him as, earnestly thinking he could be the anti-Batman. And he just didn't stand a chance. Mostly because there's no way Killer Moth could have known who Batman is, how Batman became Batman. All the hard work. 'Cause we never see Killer Moth putting in. Killer Moth didn't travel the world learning from different criminals, learning from experts. He just sort of decided one day to put on a silly costume and customize a car and, try to build a rep for himself. And I mean, that's just irresistible. That's just irresistible to write him as, um, you know, a guy who largely fails at everything he attempts. It's only, and that's why, I matched him up with Firefly because now he's dangerous. Not only because Moth to the Flame, come on, that's irresistible as well. But when he's with, he's like they're like the two killers in Cold Blood. These were like harmless second story men until they got together, and together they became homicidal. And that's Killer Moth is lent an enormous amount of gravity. He becomes a far more dangerous character when he teams up with Firefly, and I like that dynamic too. I could have written that all day long, every day. So anyway, cool, good question. Love questions about Killer Moth. I really do love the character. Okay, for those of you who live in the area or plan to travel to Florida, and I will be at the Safety Harbor Comic Fest on September 26th. It's a nice little community hall, and I'll bet you anything you'll get to meet some wrestlers because wrestlers are. Tampa is the home of wrestlers. It's where the whole professional wrestling thing started here in Tampa, Florida. A lot of them live here, and they generally show up to these events. I have a table, and they're all awesome guys to meet. I don't know why I'm talking about wrestlers. I'm not even that interested in wrestling. Oh, but they are great guys. They are great guys. A lot of fun to hang out with. So I will be there. Very rare public appearance for me. Probably not going to be doing any cons anytime in the near future. So if you happen to be in the area and desperately need a comic book to be signed by me for some reason, this is where I will be on September 26th. And I should say 2026 in case you're watching this video 5 years from now. So September 26th, 2026. And if you need to contact me with questions, pose challenges to me like Rebecca did, or swamp me with awesome questions like Yvonne did this week, please contact me at brunobookstore@gmail.com. brunobookstore@gmail.com. It is by far the most reliable way to reach me. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, liking, subscribing. Spread the word to your friends. Maybe they want to, get some learning at the College of Comic Book Knowledge. Or maybe you just want to be Mr. Know-It-All and you don't want them to know where you're getting all this valuable information. But that's up to you. That's up to you. You let your conscience be your guide. And I hope to see all of you down the road.